Shana Tova. I have to say I'm completely delighted to be here with all of you on this day of reflection and renewal. And I'm looking forward to meeting and learning from each of you over the course of the next year. Our Torah and Haftarah readings today recount 3 episodes of human conflict. I'm sure you've heard many, perhaps dozens, of sermons about the first and third stories, the story of Hagar and Sarah and Abraham, and the story of Hannah and Penina and Elkanah and Eli. Both stories are of challenging familial situations in which sometimes several parties call out to God, demonstrating this intimacy between God and humanity, as well as God's power to intervene and at least partially resolve our difficulties. But today, I want to speak about the story that's sandwiched in between those two, the story of Avraham and Avimelech. Now, the text is a little sparse, but luckily, Rabbi David Kimchi, a medieval French commentator, also known as Radak, fills in some of the blanks between the verses. When we arrive at our 4th Aliyah, he writes that Avraham is living in Beersheba, which borders on the land of the Philistines, ruled by King Avimelech. Previous to today's Torah reading, Avraham, the first patriarch of the Jewish people, dug 3 wells to provide water for his animals, family, and greater household. But one of these wells was right on the border of the land of the Philistines. So one day, Avraham is minding his own business when suddenly his servants burst into his tent, telling him that Avimelech's men have seized this well bordering on their land. Outraged, Avraham went straight to the king himself and brought him all the way down to the well. Quite a journey. Now, not only are Avraham's servants arguing with Avimelech's men, but the leaders of each of these groups enter quite the dispute. We read in Bereshit 21:26, Vayomer Avimelech, lo yadati mi asa et hadavar hazeh, v'gam ata lo higadata li, v'gam anochi lo shamati bilti hayom. Avimelech said, I do not know who did this. You did not tell me you were building this well here, nor have I heard of this incident until today. We can hear the defensiveness and even hostility in Avimelech's words. And knowing biblical kings, this was a moment of volatility for Avraham. Avimelech could have chosen to forbid Avraham from using the well. He could have commanded his men to drive Avraham and his offspring out of the land entirely, or he could have even wiped them out. The Jewish people would have been finished before they even got started. But instead, in the very next verse, their conversation seems to take a turn. Avraham gives Avimelech a gift. Vayikach Avraham tzon uvakar vayiten la'Avimelech. Avraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Avimelech. Vayichretu shnehem brit. And they made a pact. Now, the stories of Hannah and Hagar crying out to God in moments of deep distress are relevant to us too, and extremely evocative and poetic. But I want to posit that it is the story of Avraham and Avimelech that most resembles the world in which we live, a world in which we may not be aware of God, a world in which God does not so conspicuously intervene in our lives. In setting their pact, Avimelech and Avraham actually set an example of conflict resolution, and in doing so, provide us with a moment of reflection. Was there a moment this year in which we could have more calmly negotiated before jumping to conclusions? Was there a moment in which I could have given a little bit more? Avraham gives. He gives Avimelech some livestock to smooth over this conflict. Could we have made more of an effort to reconcile with people in a moment of anger? Just skimming through the text that encapsulates this episode, it would appear that these two men sort out their conflict all by themselves. And in fact, it seems that their pact is so strong that in the last verse we read, Avraham lived in the land of the Philistines for a long time. But just before that verse, we do have a mention of God. Vayita Eshel Bivarsheva. Vayikra Sham B'Shem Adonai El Olam. Avraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba and called out there the name of Adonai El Olam, everlasting God. Even though God did not specifically intervene in this negotiation, in this reconciliation, in this resolution of an existential problem of whether or not our people would have water to drink or land on which to live, God was still present. Rather than God revealing God's self through heeding Hannah's prayer for a child or assisting Abraham or Hagar in just impossible moments, in the story of Avimelech and Avraham, God was revealed through human action and decision that could have resulted in devastation, but instead resulted in peace. In this episode of our Torah reading, both Avimelech and Avraham follow the better angels of their nature. In Hebrew, their Yetzer HaTov. God is present not only in their choice of peace, but in the Torah's use of the word brit for pact. We are familiar with Brit Milah. We're familiar with the brit between Noah and God, signified by a rainbow, and even with the brit between Avraham and God, that his offspring may be as numerous as the stars in the sea, or as the stars in the sky or the sands in the sea. But you'll notice that each of these britot, the plural of brit, one of the parties is God. In fact, the only brit between human beings mentioned in the Tanakh is the brit between a master and a slave, an imbalance of power. By creating a brit between equals, Avraham and Avimelech, these leaders of two peoples, each embody a piece of the divine, and as a result, each are able to do God's work all the more. It is a tradition here at BJ that we begin our Aravit service leading into the second day of Rosh Hashanah tonight with a piece written by Rabbi Marshall T. Meyer, a critical figure in our community's history, whose legacy and wisdom continues to inspire us. In urging us to use our reflections during this time of year to prompt action, Rabbi Marshall writes, "May we seriously work to free the oppressed, feed the hungry, sustain the poor, clothe the naked, give homes to the homeless, bring hope to the depressed, and remember the forgotten." Avimelech and Avraham's episode in our Torah reading today not only gives us a moment to reflect, but it demonstrates our responsibility in this world, our responsibility to act in partnership with God and to ensure that El Olam, the everlasting God, is illuminated by our actions so that we may be able to create a better world and choose the path of peace. Shana Tova.